I can see something.
Okay. OLED.
That would be bad.
Yeah. And I got the new version.
Okay. Good afternoon. This is IETF 95 in the CIDR Working Group meeting, the first of two meetings, hopefully the more fun one. If you're not here for the CIDR meeting, you should go to wherever you're supposed to be. Next slide. So there's a note well. I'm sure you've seen it at least once this week. No. A new note well. This one I'm sure you've also seen. A proposed new one. You may have also seen this one.
You may note that the number of references increases with each of these. So every time they decide a new one, they increase the number of things you have to read.
Hopefully we have all the slides online, including the agenda. All the regular places. There are blue sheets, or there's a blue sheet going around, so it'll have to go up, down, up one side, down the other. Up, down protocol. Is there a person taking minutes already? Do we get a capture minutes volunteer? One. Can't go anywhere without a minutes person, so we'll wait for that.
Is there anyone willing to take minutes? We can't proceed without that. Anyone at all, please. Oh, Sue, thank heavens. Sue has done this. Is this the fourth time in a row? Somebody else has to be able to do that. There's an Etherpad for collaborative work. If you want to indulge in that, that would be helpful also. So please, having more than 1 minute taker is also good. And we need a JabberScribe, please. JabberScribe somebody? JabberScribe somebody, please. Begging. Come on, somebody can be the JabberScribe. Come on, come on, come on. Somebody surely. Oh, goodness gracious.
Jared might be.
Is Jared a good scriber? Oh, he gave a faint nod. Thank you. Good. Okay. So going through the working group status, the AS migration draft you may have seen is in IETF last call. So this is your last chance to say something if you didn't do it in the working group last call. The ALGS draft, the working group last call ended. It's been waiting on 6485 BIS. The ALGS draft actually has exactly the same language derived from 6485 that the ISG objected to. So RFC 6485 BIS has changed that language. It's working group consensus on that language. So I will have the ALGS draft author just replace the objected to language with the new language. Ops is, had no activity. The overview draft is actually expired. Its working group last call ended and it's waiting on the protocol draft to progress. PKI profiles had some brand new text, so we'll have to make sure that that text gets consensus. Protocol draft working group last call ended. It seems to be in good shape. No need for concern here. It should finally be ready for progression. Rollover draft, new version, no real changes, more just a refresh and some updates of references. The Delta protocol we're going to be talking about today. Origin validation signaling, working group last call, and then there was a request from someone to add a small change, and that went through our group and IDR agreed to it, so that's ready for progression. The use cases draft, new version, again, just a refresh, not really certain where that's going. The publication draft finally has seen some new activity, and that's good to see. 6485 BIS, the working group last call ended, got a small number of responses, but no objections. The topic of the BIS has never been a problem. There's been no controversy in the group, so in our opinion, that's ready to progress also. Out-of-band setup, Rob last time asked for an opinion from the working group. Did they still want to see this? And there's been no comment on the list. I've asked Rob whether he wants to just do a working group last call to try to get the working group slapped into some sort of attention. RPKI tree validation, brand new draft in the working group, and talking about that today. 6490 BIS has been published, yay hey. 6810 BIS is the RPKI router protocol, and publication is requested for that one. RPKI validation reconsidered. We have a brand new editor. Tim Brinzells is going to be talking about that today. RPSL SIG, another publication requested. The router keying had a new draft last time. I invite people, particularly those of an ops kind of viewpoint, to take a look at that and see if that draft says what useful information you would need for keying routers in BGP-SIG. Slurm was a new draft at the last meeting and is still active. And two that are kind of dormant and been dormant for a long time. So we have 26 RFCs and one brand new one. Nothing in the editor queue or in IESG processing, but one in IETF last call. Publication is requested for 2 more, and past working group last call for 5. 3 of them are just awaiting write-up, and hopefully by Wednesday I will have that complete. 2 drafts are expired, 1 newly accepted, and so for a grand total of 19 if you count the overview draft, which is expired. So today we have Tim Brinzells talking about the RRDP protocol, Oleg talking about the RPKI tree validation draft, some discussion of validation reconsidered with our new editor, and a trust anchor applicability statement from Andy Newton, but Carlos also very much involved in that and a bunch of the other RIRs. Wednesday we have a lighter agenda. Thomas King is going to talk about some of the route server use of the origin validation signaling, and that is going to be a remote presentation. Declan is going to be talking about requirements for RPKI relying parties, and then we will have time for discussion. And I sent a message to the list maybe half an hour ago, where site are going to go when we're done with these drafts, and discussion of the BGP-SIG protocol status. Okay, so our first speaker is going to be talking about the RDP protocol. Oh, golly.
Sorry, one thing for the presenters. Please stand in the pink box. Please speak into the microphone, and there's a flipper thing to change the slides for you.
Hello, everybody.
Whoa.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. Oleg Muravsky from RIPE-NCC. So this talk is about new version of repository Delta protocol. Yeah, the protocol. Yeah, there is basically not many changes as Tim sent on the list. Just repeat them. The hash attribute is back in the notification file. The second topic, I will talk about it a bit more later. There is rearrangement in the text without any significant changes, and yeah, that's basically it. So I don't think we changed much in the implementation there, apart from this second topic where we say that implementation is now allowed to aggregate updates from several CAs in one Delta file, and more about it later. So yeah, again, please read the draft, see if you're okay, let us know if there is anything you don't like. Now, what we want to talk about in more details is basically we run this in production now at RIPE-NCC on our production repository data, and we have some results that we want to share. We'll start with recap of RRDP so that we are on the same page with everybody for the next things. What is RRDP in essence is basically three types of XML files. This is the notification XML, probably not very readable, but an XML file, and it has links in forms of URLs to the snapshot file, which is also an XML. The snapshot describes all the objects in the repository current state, and it also has reference to a bunch of Delta files, and every Delta file is XML itself as well, but that one contains both publish messages and withdrawals, so it represents a change from the previous version of repository to the next version of repository. So why I'm repeating that? That's because basically we have three typical use cases for a relying party. First one is that if relying party doesn't have any initial state or previous state, this is what it does. It fetches notification file, figures out where is the snapshot file, fetches the snapshot file, parses and stores all the objects it finds there to its local store, remembers session from the header and serial number, so it could continue and figure out what to do next. So what to do next is the second step, and basically most of relying parties we expect will be in this state. So you fetch notification file again, you compare remote session with your local session. If it's still the same, you compare remote serial with your local serial. Then you figure out which Delta numbers you need to fetch from the Delta definitions. You fetch, parse, and apply deltas, starting from the local serial +1, so the next number from what you previously had, all the way up to the latest serial you've got in notification file. You process the deltas and you remember new serial. And the third typical use case is basically the same as the previous one, but in case that you don't have the delta number for the previous serial. So basically you are not up to speed with the current state of repository. You again fetch the file, check the deltas that you need to fetch. You figure out there is no delta that you want. So what you do, you fetch snapshot file similar to this first step. Now, the interesting part. So this is how our repository looks like. in terms of numbers. So we have about 3,500 of CA certificates in there, plus manifest and CRL for each of them. Similar number of ROAs and 14,000 objects in total. If you look at the rsync repository that represents it, it's about 85 megabytes of file system data. If you do tar on it, so you don't have all these file block size limitations, extensions, then it's 43 megs. But unexpectedly for us, the same content in XML file is only 28 megabytes. Even though it is XML and the content is base 64, so not very much compressed form. Anyways, let's go further. This is how our current deployment looks like. So, yeah, there is a pointer. Yeah. So inside NCC infrastructure, we have a UI for our members where they could initiate their CA, create ROAs, manipulate this info. Then we run our crypto behind it. And then we send it into cloud infrastructure where we run publication server and we talk publication protocol here, another ID in the working group. The publication server basically produces just a bunch of XML files in RRDP, and then we distribute it through a CDN, and this is where the RRDP RipeNet currently points to. So we already started to use CDN for that, although there is no actually need because we don't have that many clients and that much content so far. Yeah, another interesting thing here is basically you could see the whole path from the user to the relying party when it fetches here, and if you are interested in the total delay of basically how fast the relying party could get information here, then it's not much. So the system here, the crypto, updates every 10 minutes. Then it sends data to publication server basically immediately. The publication server generates files almost immediately. What we say to CDN is that it should cache notification XML for 1 minute. This is currently in the draft as well. So effectively what you have is 10 plus 1 minute until it gets to the CDN and you could fetch it. Some graphs from the CDN. So the first graph is the number of requests we have per day, and it's basically 1.1K per day, apart from the spikes you see here happened on the 4th till 10 February. Yeah, if we split it down to countries, basically these are the 4 countries we've got most requests from: Netherlands, where we are, Japan, Sweden, and United States. And we see that someone from Japan was doing something here, which created a lot more requests than everybody else. So these are the spikes in the total graphs. Now, yeah, interesting questions that we figured out after putting it live. How often shall we generate Delta files? So our initial approach was we have one CA publishing new set of files, basically just in most cases new CRL and manifest, maybe some changes in certificate and ROAs. So for this set of changes, we would always generate new Delta, generate new snapshot, put it in notification file, and publish everything. The result was that in the notification file, we had 6,400 lines for deltas, and the size of the notification file was 1 megabyte. So essentially what it means that every time you want to see even whether there is an update to the data you currently have or not, you were forced to fetch 1 megabyte of data. even though maybe, as we say, the notification file is cached for 1 minute. So you shouldn't come more often. If you come after 5 minutes, you will still have to fetch 1 megabyte, even though you probably only care about first 3, 4, 5 lines in there. So what we did, we changed, or we decided, let's just delay the creation of snapshot and notification for 30 seconds, which means we could accumulate all the changes that come within 30 seconds and write one Delta file for all these changes, which will result only in one snapshot and notification in 30 seconds. So the result is now we have 110 deltas in notification file, and the file is only 20 kilobyte now. And essentially what I think we could do, oh yeah, so you could see the result. We deployed it around, what was that, 2nd February, and it's going down like that, almost twice in size in the amount of data we serve per day. And yeah, these spikes still correspond to some activity from Japan, but after that it's more or less flat and remains in 2.5 gigabytes per day. So that's a significant change. And essentially what we could do, since we say the notification file is cached for 1 minute anyways, we probably could extend it up to 1 minute, this delay, instead of 30 seconds, because nobody's gonna see these changes anyways if it's cached for longer. And next question is how many deltas we should list in notification files. So basically with every new delta we put another one, and we keep the list growing, growing, growing. After some time it becomes big. Or too big. So our first approach or first idea was we should keep enough delta so their total size is not bigger than the snapshot itself. Otherwise it doesn't make sense, because it will be faster if you just fetch snapshot. We still do that, and we think this is a good approach so that relying party doesn't have to decide which one to fetch, because we basically provide just the best solution for it. If you still have your delta, enough deltas, you fetch deltas, otherwise you fetch snapshot. But, so with this approach, what we have now is the notification is about 20K, and the amount of deltas goes back for roughly 17 hours. Which actually means if we have a good behaving, as we say, relying party that keeps itself up to date regularly, more often than 17 hours, then it's still forced to fetch these 20Ks every time it needs to see whether there is update or not and what to fetch. Although again, it probably only is interested in a couple of first lines in there. So, if I project these to say, let's keep deltas only for some amount of time, so let's say for 8 hours, it would mean that notification files is shrinking to 11 kilobytes. Is that better or not? Could we say 8 hours is good enough, or we still have to keep all the data like as the first topic says? So that's basically a question to you, to operators. What do you think?
Jeff, so I can't speak as a current operator, but I did operate some IR infrastructure a number of years ago. Mm-hmm. One of the things that the snapshots versus the deltas is sometimes interesting for, especially if the deltas and the snapshots are retained long-term, not necessarily in the production server, but a easily accessible secondary server, is it gives ability for you to see histories, and that ends up being incredibly handy for research later on.
Okay, but you could keep them. So if you want them for history, you could just keep them separately. We are not going to keep them for you longer than for 17 hours.
Right, and I think it's, given the size of the diffs themselves being relatively small, and the fact that it doesn't take a long time to apply them, I wouldn't let the size of them bother you too much.
Okay.
I would actually suggest that a good procedure may just be to provide daily snapshots and provide the deltas per day.
Sorry, Chris Barr, Google. Maybe the question asked is not how many should you keep, but why would I do one versus the other here? Why would I follow this process as opposed to just scraping the whole thing? What is the benefit to me for this?
Yeah, the benefit is that in total, you're going to fetch less data, and we as the server going to serve less data.
I don't care about getting data.
Okay, well, maybe we care because we're going to pay for it.
Yeah, so I mean, if the notification is, hey, this was last updated here, and here's the history of when it was last updated for the last 30 days or whatever, so I can go, aha, I haven't seen you in 8 days. Let me go back to this one and get all the snapshots from that. And then I need to be able to look back and see the snapshots. I think it's probably worthwhile to have more than 17 hours. Like I would say, I would have started with like a month worth of data. But
No, but it's
just
the other way around. So snapshot is the current state, and deltas are going back.
okay, great. So hold deltas for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? No? Why not?
Discontinuities.
Okay, you'll have to put more words.
So if you start with, it's what happens if you have an operational oops at the place where you're actually storing the files. So if you happen to have an oops and you're doing it on monthly plus deltas, you can't reconstruct things if you're missing 1 day's worth of data. But if you have backups that are always 1 day old, the amount of data you could be missing is very small. And given the lifetimes of the certificates, we probably want this to be a small window as possible.
Okay. So that seems like that answers the question about how much you need to keep.
Well, I don't think we actually want to keep any data because there is no point in, at least in the protocol and in the operation, to have any historical data. So what we are interested in is to provide you current state as faster as possible. So that's what we try, and as effective as possible. That's what we try to achieve here, not to provide historical data 1 month back.
Yeah, no, I was going to comment pretty much the same thing. I don't think we have anything necessarily against providing this kind of history if that's useful for research or whatever. I'm just not sure that we should do it in this protocol here, because we just want to reduce the overhead to what makes sense. And if you look at a time of 8 hours, now I believe that I think our Cynic has a default of revalidating every hour. And in our case, it's even more frequent. So 8 hours would give you an efficient way, like you have the most efficient pathway open to update. If you say, for example, need to reboot your server that runs your validation software for whatever reason. If you make that period longer, you may have to wait a bit longer when your validation software starts up, because it has to do a full resync. So that affects that person, or the operator that does that. But if we would allow, for example, for 16 hours or some value like that, it does mean that everybody else has this additional overhead all the time. So is that worth it? It's like, what's an acceptable penalty for doing for having an outage? What kind of period of outage do we want to support? And that said, when you come back, you can do full resync, and it's not like that takes forever either.
Rüdiger Volk, Deutsche Telekom. Are you essentially concerned about the network transfer volume?
Yes.
Well, we are the difference I'm seeing here is a handful of packets compared to about a handful of packets needed for initiating the transmission. So this is in the noise area still.
Clear. Randy?
Randy Bush, IIJ. We have two major knobs for dealing with connectivity issues. The first is this, and it's a window of how long we will keep the data for you. And the second is the relying party software's willingness in the absence of fresh data to use old data. We found the second to be extremely useful. Currently, rsync has a much narrower window than this by, I believe, a factor of 8. Tim, am I correct? Arsenic saying, I'll keep history for an hour for you, and this keeps it 8. So I think that's quite reasonable. We don't really want to use this protocol for historical analysis, and when we do, we happen to have stashed it off somewheres in, I think, Dallas since this game began. So I don't see why we have to, give me a little more motivation to want to screw with this spec as it is.
Okay. So, yeah, a couple of more options for this. We could also say...
Who's speaking? Who?
Sorry?
Oh, is that you, Oleg?
That's
Thanks.
me again, yes. So what we could also say, we do not keep them for specific time, but we just restrict the size of notification files. So let's say it has to be 10K, no more, and then we just drop everything else. Randy again.
Randy Bush, IJ, not predictable and decays over time.
Yes.
As the volume of RPKI data grows, the window will get less.
Yes.
I don't think you want to go down this path.
Okay, so the next point is for how long shall we keep the files which are not referenced anymore in notification so that the relying parties could still download them. So imagine you just fetch notification file, you discovered what are the URLs to fetch next, you started to fetch snapshot, let's say it's 20 megs, it takes you long. In the meantime, the new version with new deltas came, we generated new snapshot, we put new notification file, and we deleted the file that you are downloading. So that's not nice. You are forced to fetch notification file again, figure out the new snapshot URL again, and start it again. And if we get new version again, then it repeats and repeats and repeats. So yeah, what we are doing now, we are keeping the files for 1 hour. And what it basically means is 7 snapshot is almost 200 megs. The whole repository is 230 megs. This is essentially not a problem for you, but more for us, how big our data footprint is, or to whoever will run these software. So I guess my question is 1 hour good enough or not? But I think we're pretty good on that, right? And the footprint is not that big, so we could do that, even in the cloud and everything. And I think this is the most interesting question, is how much useful versus not so much useful data we have. So basically what happens every day is that every CA publishes updates to its manifest and CRLs every X hours. And in parallel to that, there might be some updates to the certificates and ROAs and stuff. So we were interested in how much data, the useful data, meaning certificates and ROAs, are there in all these deltas and how many just updates to manifests and serials. So yeah, what I did, I took all the deltas for 18 hours as we keep them, which is about 30 megs of data, and compared how many changes to every type of objects we have there. And this is the result. So we have 7,000, almost 8,000 manifests and almost same amount of serials, only 4 rows and no certificates. So basically what it means is every relying party is forced to download 48 megabytes per day or per 18 hours, no, per day, just to figure out that there were 4 interesting objects to the relying party. All the other information, so all the other megabytes are just to keep the RPKI state in what all the RFCs tell us to do. So we keep re-signing CRL and we keep republishing manifest just for that. So another thing, but maybe the second column is not very representative, that was the end of the previous week where probably all of you were flying here and were changing your CRLs. So this, the last column is basically average for March. This is the number per day that we have. And it's basically 10,000 serials and manifest, 11 rows on average per day, and 6 certificates. So the question is, maybe we should do it differently. So maybe I should tell as well. So what we have in our system is basically the next update time in CRL is set to 24 hours, but we republish all the objects every 8 hours, which gives us some time to republish again if we find the problem. So essentially we publish all the objects 3 times per day, and this is the result of that. So the question is, maybe we are too aggressive with it. Maybe we should do it less often, or maybe we should do something else completely. Have some other mechanism of telling there are no useful updates, everything is still the same. Please go on. Yeah, Tim?
Yeah. Yeah, I would also ask other people to comment on this, of course, but just to clarify a bit more from my perspective, at least. So manifest and CRLs have a next update time. Manifest, in addition, have a certificate that has an expiry time, the EE certificate. I think originally the intention for manifest was to be used to be able to catch if data is being replayed or is stale, which makes sense, I guess, with Arsenic or any clear text protocol where you need to have this object security to check that everything is still okay. But the price is a lot of noise. What I was thinking, but this is by no means final, but anyway, let me just go there. If we have a certificate that has an SIA entry that points to an HTTPS, uses the HTTPS protocol, it points to a server. If you can trust the identity of that server, and that server is trusted in turn by the CA, then do we need this amount of flagging against replays, withdrawals, all that kind of stuff? If we can be sure that we're talking to the right publication server, can we not reduce this frequency of reissuing manifests and CRLs? Because we now have a reliable method of knowing that an actual update is available. Because if we could go there, and I'm not sure that we can go there completely, but I want to ask the question, but if we could go there, you could reduce the volume here by potentially even a factor of 1,000. And I think that's worth thinking about. So I don't have the final answer. I just have a hunch that, if you can really trust HTTPS, this may be worth it. Now, there are problems, of course, in HTTPS trust anchors, like there are many. So that's something to think about. For reference, in our implementation, we currently use the default trust anchors that ship with the Java runtime environment. That may be a choice we want to change in future, but that's what we do today. And you can add individual HTTPS certificates manually. We added this specifically to be able to work in a test environment. Yeah, just putting it out here. I think it's worth to think about this stuff, because if we can secure this channel and can be sure that we get a notification whenever it's appropriate, then yeah, I think we can really reduce the amount of data that is being sent, and I think it can become a whole lot more efficient. So.
Anybody else?
Sandy Murphy Parsons. A set of questions. Some of your comparison of one way you did it to the alternative was stated in terms of what the relying party had to download. It seems to me that one of the motivations for the RRDP protocol was concerns of the load on the server. So I presume that this concern about what the relying party is downloading is really just masking that your concern is what the server has to serve, and that you are satisfied that the RRDP protocol is reducing the burden on the server as it was intended.
Yes, so that is correct. So I think with the RRDP, we already reduced it on the server side, and we are quite happy with that. So what we are looking now at is basically on the side of relying party. I think it's still an excessive amount of data it needs to fetch to discover only few changes in there.
Okay. Randy said something about this is going to change over time, and that was something you seem to be making decisions, design decisions on the basis of the current state, which isn't really as large as full deployment is going to be. It seemed to me that when you were doing the comparisons, each of those alternatives were going to scale linearly as time goes on. So I'm not thinking that you're going to run into a case of, oh, we made this decision and it was too early. But I just wanted to hear you say that.
No, I think it will, it will scale linearly, which means we're going to have even more data to download, but the ratio will be the same, essentially. So it's about 1,000.
Okay. I noticed that on one of the slides you talked about using the publication protocol. Can I presume that that use was one of the reasons why there was a new version of the publication protocol that you and the, okay. And you've implemented RRDP, and I'm pretty sure rpki.net has. Anybody else?
No.
Okay.
Not that we know, at least, but we did test with Randy, who is coming to Mike in the back.
I said rpki.net.
We have a success.
There is no rpki.net. Randy Bush, you mean Dragon Research Labs? Dragon Research Labs and RIPE have been interoperating, doing interoperability testing, etc., including I'm running a child of RIPE. And RDP is working to caches, etc.
Okay.
We have some interesting problems with TLS in that you really want a server for the relying party and for the CA and the publisher, to be more specific, which can do 1.2, and that is not, Ubuntu 14.04. Welcome to Xenio.
Okay. Thank you.
My turn?
Dr. Ma from CDS. My question is about how to do with manifest data. As we know, if there are some valid signed objects in the publication point, but they are not present on the manifest. So so far, the IETF95-SIDR-201604-1400 doesn't mandate any specific relying party behavior. So I wonder, is there any suggestion in your draft to handle this?
No. So basically, this is just a RDP protocol which publishes whatever was sent to the server, and there is nothing about how to validate it. There is another draft, I'm going to talk about it later, which explains how we do validation in our validator. And basically what we do, we only look at the manifest entries and we ignore any other objects that might be there, but this is not related to this draft at all.
Thank you.
Chris Moore, Google. So the size aside, I don't think is particularly important right now. Not yet, maybe. So it seems like your chief change here would be to make the manifest and the CRL get updated less frequently.
Yes.
Right. So so first off, I think the manifest's purpose, maybe it's conflated with object security bits, but it's really like, this is the stuff that I expect other people to see and use. I might put a bunch of other crazy stuff in my repository. Don't matter. What's in the manifest matters. So that should be the only thing people care about, is what's in that should be what gets gathered. The CRL should be, oh, I made a mistake, please stop using this thing, right? We agree with that, that's great. I think turning the crank on your machinery on a regular basis, even more often than you would generate a new ROA, should tell you when there's a problem with your machinery, right? So I think that maybe more often is good. Also, I would say that ROAs and certificates probably don't get created particularly often after initial creation, because it really represents gain and loss of a customer, more or less, right? So I would expect ROAs and certificates to be a relatively small number, but say a percentage of the overall table, something like 10% of the table would be represented as change every day, right? Something, I don't know if 10% is the right number, but let's just say it is, right? So if the whole table is 600,000 routes today, you should say 60,000 ROAs change per day. Right, I'm sure somebody has much better numbers than 10%, but it doesn't really matter what that number is. I still don't think that turning the crank on the manifest a couple times a day is particularly bad. Maybe once an hour is overkill, but this also depends on the individual operator in question, right? They may have, like Deutsche Telekom may gain and lose 10 customers an hour, right? So they will actually want to turn that crank 3 times an hour. But Google may never gain new customers for 2 or 3 years. And we may not need to turn the crank, but we want to make sure that all of our machinery still works. Mm-hmm. So maybe what you're asking here is really like, what's the right default to set, and some operator guidance about, you should turn the crank at least this often so you know that it works. However, turning it faster than this doesn't help you. Turning it slower than this hurts you.
Yeah, I think it's not just about whether it works or not, but this is really to prevent some security issues that might happen. So this is basically to tell...
Expand on what those are. Right. I mean, when you say there could be some security issues, yes, an asteroid could hit us, but I don't think that's the problem. I mean, you update the manifest when you say, I put something new there. And then you put a ROA or a cert, and somebody should say, aha, there's an update to your manifest. There's the checksum change. Let me go. You I'll figure out what needs to
get. Yeah, this is definitely. So whenever there is some useful change, we will update manifest. But what I'm talking here about, so all these numbers, 10,000 are 10,000 objects were changed without anything else in manifest changing. So it's essentially the same manifest published again, and the same CRL published again, just with the new next update time.
Yeah, well, okay, Rüdiger Volk. So for optimizing this, one really just has to focus on analyzing what are the exact reasons for defining a maximum lifetime of a manifest. Regularly for just moving on, a manifest only needs to change when any object does change. And and my take is that the quick refreshing of the manifests is a very naive implementation of keeping it fresh. And well, okay, actually a good thing for starters to rather play it secure. But when you start to optimize, well, okay, you really should understand what you are optimizing for. Yeah, well, okay, my understanding is that, well, okay, the manifest is there to deal with potential inconsistencies of the data store that are particularly likely to happen when using the rsync thing. I would not make any naive prediction whether those insecurities and inconsistencies change in any predictable way when you change the data store model as you are doing.
I need to inject. We have 40 minutes and 3 more presentations. So please, if you could just be succinct and then bring all the other ideas to the list. Go ahead, Tim. You can
yeah,
ahead.
no, sure, we can discuss this on the list. But very short, we interpreted that we should have fairly short-lived manifests to guard against the middle attacks where replays are being done to the relying party. So they are being served old data. And how long do you want to be vulnerable to that? And my earlier point was that if we have HTTPS and we can trust that to be notified of updates, we may not need that. And then we can still crank the machinery, but maybe we don't need to do it 3 times per day, but once a week or, you know, something like that. And that would reduce the traffic a lot already. So, but maybe let's take this to the list. Thank you for your comments.
If the other speakers keep to what they thought their time would be, we might have time at the end to revisit this topic. Okay.
Yes, so
Any more questions? I guess not.
we don't have time later.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Is this you again?
So this is again the other draft that we worked on, and this is the new name for the old draft. The draft was adopted as a working group item, so that's why there is a new submission and a new name. Essentially, a new version. Not much changes functionally. New name. We received some feedback from several people. We put it in, fixed some other things, added missing sections that are required, and that's basically it. But yes, so currently the document only describes how we do validation in our implementation. It could be that for the working group as a whole, it's more interesting to describe different approaches or all of the approaches, or yes, actually my question is, what is the useful scope? Shall we include all these different things in the document or not?
Rüdiger Volk. I tend to think that for each implementation that I consider to use, I would like to have it. For getting that done, of course, a common effort of systematically researching and mapping the problem space and the solution space would be helpful, but kind of, from my perspective, kind of the responsibility is someone who is offering a solution here should explain what the customer gets.
Okay. Anybody else? So you see, that was fast. We could go back to the previous.
One question, when you wrote the draft, did you have a certain, in this category, we made this decision, in this category, they made that decision. If you can, if the draft can express the categories
Yes,
of choices
I think
that you were making choices in, it might be helpful.
Yeah, I think
for
we
other
could
people.
put more explanation why we chose this or why we do it like that, what
Mm-hmm.
problems it circumvents, or why this solution.
Yeah.
So that
Whys
we could
are always
add.
useful.
Yeah, that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Any
Good,
more
back on track.
questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, hello. I'll try to be quick. We
We're
talked
back on
about this.
track now.
Sorry?
We're pretty much back on track.
Okay, well, I'll try to be quick anyway, because we've spoken about this a few times already. Here again, instead of Jeff, I suppose, who spoke about this earlier, I made a new text, well, checked with co-authors, but, sorry, maybe I should hold this. Okay, that's better. Right. So we made a new text to this document, taking a different angle to explain what we want to do here, although the basic idea is the same. The angle the document now takes is, it's really explained from a point of view of doing top-down validation. And specifically, it tells you about what would change if you do the reconsidered approach. I hope that that is useful and that would help people understand better what we propose. But it's really also up to you to give feedback on that. Now, on the content, quickly again. So in this model here, this is an example of certificates that are all valid, a ROA that's valid under the current rules. So now things can go invalid, and that's what we're trying to address here. So when the child receives a reduced certificate where certain resources are removed, then in this case, the certificate issued by the child to the grandchild is rejected completely, and the ROA of the grandchild is also rejected as a result. So yeah, that's basically what I said here. It's actually the parent issuing a new certificate. In this case, the child was unaware or sloppy or something, and now the grandchild is invalidated. So 3 parties involved here. We think that there may be many reasons why this might happen, and we also feel that you cannot really adequately address all of them all the time. Transfers can happen and timing may be off, but then again, I know there are efforts to describe transfers, but in general, there may be, and there probably will have to be, a provision where the parent says at some point, well, this is it, this is enough, we need to remove this resource. I know that certainly for us with the rules that we have in address policy, that is the case. At some point, things have to be retrieved. Also, the parent can make a mistake. Now, you could enumerate other reasons here as well. The commonality, though, I think so far for us is that we don't see this happening all the time. We don't. The likelihood of this going wrong is actually quite low, I believe, at least personally, but the impact is quite high. Now, what Reconsidered proposes is that we limit the impact to just the resources that are being disputed or have disappeared. So in this case, the grandchild certificate that lists a particular set of resources not held by the child would not be rejected entirely. We would just keep note and warn that a specific set of resources, like the 10/24 here, is considered invalid. The ROA there does not mention this resource, so it's still considered valid. If, for example, the grandchild would create a ROA for the resource that was actually removed, that ROA would be considered invalid, because the ROA prefix has to appear on the not only on the EE certificate, but in our proposal on the accepted resource set of the EE certificate. So there have been criticisms on this that I want to also talk about here briefly. Other people can, of course, speak up for their own, but I wanted to kind of voice what I heard. So one of the things I heard was that there's less incentive for the child in this case to clean up what they're doing. And while that may be true, I would say there are warnings. But maybe more importantly, it may not be the child's fault that they're actually issuing certificates that are now invalid. And they may not be aware. So invalidating them entirely, invalidating their child, so the grandchild entirely, to me seems quite drastic. Yeah, well, that's just it. The other concern that I actually raised back in Honolulu is that with this approach, you could think that, well, now you can remove very specific resources at the top of the certificate chain with less collateral damage, let's say. That can happen, but again, in my opinion, I'm not sure that that is a real-world issue, because I'm not convinced that if we go down that path, invalidating the grandchild in this case entirely would stop people. And I do believe we have a much bigger problem that, I don't know, time permitting, I can comment on. Because the whole RPKI system is built on trust. And it's people trusting that the statements there are in fact true, that they represent who holds the resource. If this system was used or abused as, say, a blacklisting tool, that trust would soon disappear. And I think its usefulness would be greatly reduced. So I would urge, because this has come up in conversation on the mailing list and in these sessions before, I would say that we also have a responsibility to highlight that it may actually not be in, evil empire's interest to go down this path, because what you achieve is not very effective. People won't really black hole routes because there's local policy, there's not 100% uptake. And on the flip side, you drive people away from a system that could actually protect your critical infrastructure. So thank you for the diversion, but I wanted to make that point. Now, going on, why do we actually think that reconsidered is a good idea? Well, I hinted to quite a lot of this already. We think we should just limit the impact of the inconsistencies that we see to just those resources. We believe that overclaims in this approach can never be seen as valid. We also have code running in our validator that implements this, so we know we have some practical experience with it. And yeah, maybe in a nutshell, the bullet point below is really what I think the big gain is. I believe it will still be a low likelihood problem, but this can change it to the lowest possible impact. And I think that's a better place to be. So with that, I guess I can open questions and put on my fire retardant vest.
Randy Bush, IJ. I am, just to repeat, I am not against this proposal. I would note that there are almost no grandchildren in existence, though I'm about to have one, as it were. I've got 7 actually, but one with the RPKI. We're not seeing this problem. We are, but My issue is not with this. My issue is we've spent massive time arguing this, and we've had some very real problems with some very real failures to do with manifest lifetimes, et cetera, and we're not addressing them. We're still arguing over this.
Russ Housley. I really appreciated slide 6. I think that was what we've been asking for a long, long time and not been getting. All we've been hearing is it's too brittle. And if you look at that first bullet and think about transfers that are actually between RIRs, I think people can start to understand where some concerns might be. What I would have liked to see next, and is not in part of this presentation, is how does this affect the validation algorithm in 3779? Has that work been done?
So I can't speak about 3779 in general, but the document explains how this would be applied in the RPKI domain, specifically to validating ROAS. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
I don't think it did last time I looked. I did not read the most recent version. I'll check.
Well, yeah, I'm taking a different approach there that I would hope is, well, it is kind of following the process from the top. That's at least what I'm achieving with it, or trying to achieve with it. So I would really welcome feedback on whether that's clear or not.
Can I break in, Randy, again? Rob, actually, who wrote the 3779 hacks into OpenSSL for the RPKI, says the change is minimal. Pardon? It's not done, but the change, he believes, is minimal. Sorry to put words in his mouth, and I could be completely wrong here, but that is my memory of what Rob, who's the hacker who's done this stuff, said.
I think the key word there, though, is changes. So if, Russ, if you were asking whether this could be done in a way compatible with 3779. Okay, thank you.
This finesses the question of whether OpenSSL is very happy taking changes deep in validation at this time of life.
Doug Montgomery, can you go forward to the first one more? So, sorry, I didn't read the latest draft. Could you answer the question that was discussed before? In the latest draft, if 192.168 was part of the ROA, are you treating the ROA atomically, or individual resources in the ROA themselves can be?
Right. No, I would actually advise against fate sharing different prefixes in a single ROA. I'm not sure that we need that.
But if they did, what does the current draft say about it?
That the ROA would be invalid as a whole.
So they would share the fate at that stage?
Yes, if they share fate in the current text, because the ROA validation says that all the prefixes have to appear on the valid certificate, EE certificate for that ROA. We don't want to modify that. Just keep it simple. The only change is really that we say it has to appear on the verified set of resources of that EE certificate. So if there's any mismatch, then the ROA as a whole would be rejected in the current draft. Yeah. And yeah, like I said, the way around that, I think, is to just generate different ROAs for different prefixes. And I don't think that's a problem.
Jeff Oz, I think it is a good idea to allow for the looser validation. Towards the argument of you want people to keep their house clean and not issue bad stuff. The analogy that we'd have from like the existing IRR databases doesn't really hold, because IRR, you can't tell what is last valid. Whereas with the ROA chain, you can actually see that one portion of this has been removed, and you can tell that even though it's a somewhat stale piece of information, what the proper piece of information actually is. So I think that's actually a good property, even though it doesn't encourage people to keep their house clean. The related question I have, again, apologies for not having read the current versions of the draft. If a row has been issued for some resource like a /24, and a parent shrinks the space in question, so for example, shrinks from 24 to 25, would it be reasonable potentially in that case to say that the covered /25 is valid for the ROA, even though that's not the ROA that's actually issued? I understand why we may not want that to be in the way the system currently works, but sort of by similar analogy, it's we shrunk the resource, a portion of it is still valid.
Yeah, like I said, we just try to keep it as simple as possible. And I'm not sure that I can fully see the implications of that. So that's why I kind of wanted to stay away from that, because I think if we do this, we already achieve most of what we want to achieve. But yeah, in theory, you could take this further. Yeah, like I said, I'm not sure that I have the full picture. So maybe we should just keep it simple.
Sandy Murphy Parsons, this might be a chair comment. At some point, if we're going forward with this, and the working group consensus seems to be that we're going to have to do a review of other previously published RFCs, like the ROA validation, to see whether the language in that has to change with respect to this new way of deciding what's a valid resource. Given that we've seen a whole lot of people with very large pieces of address space selling off pieces to various different people as a lucrative business these days, I think a case where there was a ROA for an aggregate and part of the aggregate was being transferred elsewhere has a more likelihood to occur. Most of the people who are selling off large portions of address space aren't using them, so they're not actually in the routing table. But I think you have to consider the possibility in whatever your text says. Done with comments.
Okay, well, on that, but that may not be related to this actually. We have had questions from people who together, let's say, hold a bigger prefix, and they agree that the bigger prefix can be announced, and one of the parties does it more specific. And with the current model, that you cannot model that on ROAS.
Yeah.
So, but that's because there can only be one party signing a ROA.
Yeah.
And you would have to have multiple parties. So I'm not saying that we can or should address that, but that is out there. But that's a real question we got from people using our system.
Long ago, the CIDR working group went through thrashes of conversations about having multiple signatures on a ROA and finally decided, don't go there. So well, yeah. I'm amused to see it come up in real cases. Rudiger, did you have something? Okay. Done. Any other questions? No. Okay.
Giants up here? What's going on?
Good afternoon. I'm Andy Newton. I work for Aaron, and I'm presenting our draft that we wrote about the trust anchors that the RARs have, and where we plan on going with our trust anchors. So, current state of the RARs is we're currently getting into a whole lot more inter-RAR transfers. At the moment, we're doing transfers between APNIC, RIPE, and Aaron. So there's a lot more play in the space than there was previously. At present, the RIRs have 3 different models of how the trust anchors are published, and we've been talking about ways to come up with one single model of doing that. And in the process, we've also talked about how to simplify the trust anchor model, not just to make it uniform, but to simplify it and make it more operationally robust. So what this draft states is that with effects of overclaiming that we currently have with RPKI, mistakes are kind of easy to make, especially as we get into more transfers. And essentially, in order for us to have certain TA models where one RIR is subservient to another RIR, a mistake that one RIR can make can cause some pretty big impact to another region. And we don't think that's a very good thing to do. So what we want to do is we want to move to a situation where every TA each RIR has a TA that holds all the resources. So that's what this draft says, and this is the model we want to go to. We're going to start asking our individual communities whether they think this is a good idea or not, and go from there. So if you want to influence what the RIR communities say about this, we invite you to go to the RIR meetings, talk to board members, talk to people in those communities to help give us input on this TA model. We do believe that this is a good thing to publish as an RFC because for people who are relying on the RPKI, for them to understand how the TA models work for all the RIRs is a good thing. So that's really the presentation. Any questions?
So you're looking for publication in the CIDR working group of this draft?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So adoption by the working group and then...
That would be the best desired outcome. Yeah, we believe that would be best because as people anyone who's relying on the RPKI should understand how the TA model works.
Right.
Right. So.
And if working group consensus changes the mechanism you've described?
Well, so you're asking if working group consensus says don't do this, then we'll obviously have to publish this somewhere else. But our desire is to publish this as an RFC.
Okay.
Rüdiger Volk. Well, okay, I'm not completely sure. Are you talking about the trust anchors, like the access to the trust anchors, or are you talking about the content and the semantics of root certificates?
The trust anchors. So
the trust anchors.
Yes.
Okay. So let me just remind that if the trust anchors are pointing to root certificates that overclaim in the sense you are saying, I think there is also a demand and a requirement for a documentation of what the overlapping root certificates actually mean and how they are constructed. Of course, you might answer, please go to your particular RIR and ask them and their board to define that.
So Rüdiger, can you restate that? I just didn't catch it all. What are you asking us to clarify?
In Yokohama, you may remember that I did an impromptu last slide where I reported the observation that the various root certificates that are in the game did have overlaps that were not just the all-encompassing root of all the resources, but it was actually 2,000-something particulars. And for a relying party that cares, kind of the implied inconsistencies or overlaps are something that we would like to have explained.
Okay, I see what you mean. So in other words, explain why we're doing this.
No, well, okay. Actually explain what you are doing and what as a consequence, the semantics of the root certificates that are overlapping are.
I get your point. So explain what the content is and why we're doing it, right? Okay, Tim?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I think that is addressed in the document, actually, because what it amounts to is that the RARs say that we trust each other to overclaim each other's space, but if you look at what's practically being issued to certificates further down and compare those, you should see no overlaps.
Yeah, I think what he was getting at is explain the overlaps.
Yeah, so there is a large overlap between the root certificates in this model. So on that level, you don't know what that means. That's mainly for technical reasons that we want to go down that path. And if you are concerned about resources being issued to different parties, two different parties further down, then you can verify that by looking at the certificates issued below.
Well, the thing is, as a relying party, I try to be so careful to actually detect when the data that I'm working with has inconsistencies and overlaps. Whether that happens for customers of AT&T and myself, or whether it happens between what the RIRs are doing, is technically kind of irrelevant. If there are inconsistencies that are put there by design and intentionally, I demand that I get explanations for them, and actually I request that such anomalies should be minimized as to make the life of a discerning relying party easier.
Randy?
Randy Bush, IJ. I think another spin on what Herr Volk is asking is, if I wish to be a really rigorous relying party, I need some algorithmic and programmable way of knowing what you folk are doing. I would also note that I have heard from one IR that they are considering just routing at 0/0. I would also note that probably most of the people in this room and in the community who do not work for RIRs are wondering why we're discussing trust anchors in the plural.
Terry Manderson, no affiliation as an individual. So when I think back to the germination of RPKI, uniqueness was an important thing in the structure. Now, if you're going to change that, and you're obviously coming together as a collective to do that, that's okay, but that kind of says PKI is the wrong thing.
Randy Bush again. To come a little bit to their defense, there's a problem with transfer and make before break. And the duplication does address that.
Yes, it does.
But I think to turn that into what Rudiger's asking for, when that's in process, there should be some data structure that a second data structure, i.e. whatever you call your stats files on Wednesday, which I can use to drive the validator to test that indeed this duplication is correct.
Yes, so we have the stats file. We're looking at a transfer log as well. Can't promise that, but we're looking at that. But that might solve your algorithmic need.
In general, the under documentation of the transfer process does us no service.
So, but I agree. We can address Rudiger's comment. Any other questions?
Okay.
Chris Marco. So even in the case of a single root, if we lived in a magical world where IANA had a root certificate and they signed down a bunch of resources to each RAR, and they signed them down to LARs and NARs and blah, blah, blah. And even in that world, in a transfer between Apnic and Aaron, there would have to be double accounting before break to work. That's a question.
Yes.
That's okay. So even in that world, which is what we would all like to utopia we'd all like to be in, if we have to decide her, is if we have to do this, that's the utopia we'd like to be in. Even in that world, we have to do double accounting. We have in some cases, so we'd have to have some system to manage that. So maybe it's the other data structure is really what's missing from the discussion of the document, right?
I don't think so. Current RPKI won't get you out of that, right? So the issue is that if you have overclaiming or overlapping today, you're with one TA, right? With one global TA, then you've got a problem. That's what Randy just said.
Yes. Well, no, that's not true. I mean, I think even in the single root case, I can assign address space to two legs, and it will validate up the legs in both cases.
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is why the RPKI works in make before break, and the DNS schemes that Tony Lee and I, et cetera, proposed in 98 don't, because DNS can only do a single delegation. The RPKI can do multiple. So I give that address space to the sender and the receiver. Do it. What Rudiger's asking for is when I am doing that, how do I differentiate between that is broken and that is intentional? That's all.
Thank you.
So Rudiger.
Just one additional point in the problem space there. Actually, for a CA and their customer to whom they delegate stuff, they actually might put explicitly into their contract that a competing delegation will not be certified.
Right. Yep. We have, I think, 4 minutes left. Do we want to revisit the conversation that I cut off earlier? No, continue on the mailing list with the discussion of, okay, all righty. Anyone have anything else that they would like to bring up at this time? And there's time on Wednesday to bring up other additional topics. So anything that you would like to see brought before the working group in the next 4 minutes? Yes? No? Kiera, are you getting up to the mic or getting up to leave? Getting up to leave. Okay. All righty. I'll give you 3 minutes of your life back. Yay. Blue sheets. Anybody who has not signed the blue sheets, please do so. We actually had a good crowd this time. I'd like to see everybody's name on it. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
We're gonna post it.
Thank you.